Looking back now, I can still remember that perfect afternoon in San Diego like it was yesterday. The California sun was beating down on my neck as I jogged along the beach, my Marine Corps t-shirt soaked with sweat. I had just finished another grueling day of sniper training at Camp Pendleton, and all I wanted was something cold to take the edge off. That's when I saw her, standing in line at Hanson's ice cream shop on Ocean Boulevard. Rachel Collins, though I didn't know her name then, was wearing a light blue sundress that caught the breeze just right. Her auburn hair seemed to catch fire in the setting sun, and when she turned around, I saw the most striking green eyes I'd ever encountered. I probably would have just admired her from afar. A Marine Corps staff sergeant isn't exactly in the same league as someone who looks like they just stepped out of a fashion magazine. But fate had other plans. Some kid on rollerblades came barreling down the boardwalk, and before I knew what was happening, Rachel was knocked off balance. Her ice cream cone went flying, and I moved without thinking, catching her before she hit the ground. "Nice catch, Marine," she said, steadying herself against my chest. Her smile could have lit up the whole damn beach. "Least I could do, ma'am," I replied, helping her back to her feet. "Mike Anderson, Staff Sergeant, Scout Sniper Training Unit." "Rachel Collins," she said, brushing some sand off her dress. "MBA student at USD, and now -1 ice cream cone." "Well, Miss Collins, please allow me to remedy that situation," I offered, already reaching for my wallet. She tried to protest, but I insisted it was part of my duty to help civilians in distress. That made her laugh. God, that laugh would become my favorite sound in the world. We ended up talking for hours on the beach that evening. She told me about growing up in Newport Beach, about her father's investment firm, about her dreams of running her own company someday. I shared stories about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about following my father and grandfather's footsteps into the Marines, about the brotherhood I'd found in the Corps. When the sun finally set and the evening grew cool, neither of us wanted the night to end. "You know," she said, wrapping her arms around herself as the breeze picked up, "there's a nice little Italian place just up the street if you're hungry." I wasn't about to pass up more time with her, even if the place was way above my pay grade. That dinner turned into more dates, and before I knew it, I was head over heels for this amazing woman who was way out of my league. Rachel's father wasn't exactly thrilled when she brought me home to meet the family. William Collins was old money, and I could tell he had other plans for his daughter than having her marry a Marine. But Rachel stood her ground. "Daddy," she'd said during that first tense dinner, "Mike is one of the best snipers in the Marine COR. P.S. He's dedicated his life to serving this country. If that's not good enough for you, then I don't know what is." Her father might not have been convinced, but he was smart enough to know pushing too hard would only drive Rachel away. So we reached a compromise, a prenuptial agreement to protect the family's assets. My JAG lawyer reviewed it, made some adjustments to protect my family's ranch in Texas, and we signed the papers. The wedding was everything Rachel deserved, a beautiful ceremony on the beach at sunset, with my fellow Marines forming the traditional sword arch. Life seemed perfect. Emily came along 2 years later, the spitting image of her mother with just enough of my stubbornness to keep us on our toes. I continued advancing in the Corps, while Rachel started making waves in her father's company. We made it work, even through deployments and training rotations. Every time I had to leave, Rachel would kiss me goodbye and remind me of the Marine Corps motto, Semper Fidelis. "Always faithful," she'd say, squeezing my hand. "Come back to us, Mike." And I always did, until that fateful deployment in 2011. I was leading a specialized sniper team in Afghanistan, tracking high-value targets for Task Force Thunder. The mission was classified, but the intel was solid. A major player in the Taliban's leadership was meeting with his lieutenants in a compound near the Pakistani border. We'd been watching the place for 3 days when everything went sideways. The last thing I remember was the crack of a rifle that wasn't ours, and the radio exploding with calls of contact, contact, then darkness. When I came to, I was bound and blindfolded in the back of a moving vehicle. I could hear my captors speaking in a mix of languages, Pashto, Arabic, and something else I couldn't identify. One phrase kept coming up: keep him alive. The American wants him contained, not killed. At the time, I thought they were talking about ransom negotiations. I had no idea that the American was Robert Maxwell, the chairman of my wife's company, or that my capture was part of a larger plan. All I knew was that I had to survive, had to find a way back to Rachel and Emily. I thought about them constantly during those first weeks of captivity. I had a photo in my wallet that somehow my captors had missed. Rachel and Emily at the beach, both laughing at something off camera. That photo became my lifeline. Every time the beatings got bad, every time they moved me to a new location, every time I thought about giving up, I'd touch that photo through the fabric of my pocket and remember what I was fighting for. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. They kept me isolated, moving me frequently between locations. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of the outside world, dense jungle vegetation that didn't match what I'd seen in Afghanistan. I started to realize I wasn't where I was supposed to be. The heat was diffier. And the sounds were different. Even the dirt smelled different. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was getting back to my family. I kept my mind sharp by running through sniper calculations, reciting the Scout Sniper Creed, planning impossible escapes. And every night, I'd whisper to that worn photo in my pocket, "Semper Fi, my loves. Always faithful. I'm coming home." I had no way of knowing that back home, Rachel was being told I was likely dead. No way of knowing that Robert Maxwell was already making his move, using my absence to get closer to my wife. No way of knowing that my teenage daughter was watching it all happen, documenting everything with a wisdom beyond her years. All I knew was that I had made a promise to come home. And Marines don't break their promises. For nearly 5 years, that promise kept me going. Through the beatings, through the isolation, through the countless failed escape attempts, I knew Rachel and Emily were waiting for me. I knew I had to find a way back to them. What I didn't know was that when I finally did make it home, nothing would be the same. The world I'd left behind had changed in ways I never could have imagined. And the real fight, the fight for my family, was only just beginning. But first, I had to escape. And after almost 5 years of waiting, watching, and planning, I finally saw my chance. It came during a thunderstorm when the power went out in the compound where they were holding me. My guards were distracted, complaining about the heat and the rain. One of them got sloppy with the door locks. It was all I needed. Years of scout sniper training kicked in, quick, quiet, efficient. Within minutes, I had a weapon, ammunition, and most importantly, freedom. But I was about to discover that escaping captivity was only the beginning of my journey home. And the real test of Semper Fidelis, always faithful, was still to come. The African jungle was nothing like the terrain I trained for in Afghanistan. The humidity was suffocating, and the vegetation was so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. But I kept moving east, using the sun to navigate just like I'd been taught. That first night of freedom, I found a secure position in a dense thicket and took stock of my situation. I had managed to grab an AK-47 with 2 magazines, a combat knife, and a canteen of water. Most importantly, I still had that worn photo in my pocket, my lifeline to sanity for the past 5 years. In the dim moonlight, I studied Rachel and Emily's faces, touching them gently with my fingertip. "I'm coming home," I whispered. "Just hold on a little longer." The search party started at dawn. I could hear them crashing through the undergrowth, calling to each other in a mix of languages. My scout sniper training kicked in automatically. Stay low, move quiet, leave no trail. The jungle itself became my ally, its dense canopy hiding me from aerial searches. I ate what I could find, fruits I recognized from survival training, insects when I had to. Every few miles, I'd find a high point to get my bearings, always keeping the rising sun to my left. Days blurred together in a haze of constant movement and vigilance. I lost track of time, marking the passing days only by the rising and setting of the sun. My military-issued boots fell apart after the first week. My uniform, already tattered from years of captivity, became little more than rags. But still I pushed on. Every step was one step closer to home. Every mile was 1 mile closer to Rachel and Emily. I avoided villages when I could, but sometimes necessity forced me to take risks. One night, desperate for water, I crept into a small settlement. As I was filling my canteen at their well, I overheard two men speaking in French. That's when I realized I was somewhere in West Africa. The knowledge should have discouraged me. I was thousands of miles from any American embassy. Instead, it gave me hope. At least now I knew which direction to go. Weeks passed, maybe months. I crossed rivers, scaled hills, traversed valleys. The jungle gradually gave way to savanna, but I kept moving east. Always east. Through it all, that photo remained my compass, my reason to keep going. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, I'd look at their smiling faces. When hunger gnawed at my stomach, I'd remember family dinners at our home in San Diego. When loneliness pressed in like a physical weight, I'd recall Rachel's laugh, Emily's hugs. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw signs of civilization. Real roads, power lines, modern buildings in the distance. I waited until nightfall before approaching the city. The sight of an American flag flying over a building nearly brought me to my knees. I had made it to the U.S. Embassy in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. My appearance caused quite a stir at the embassy gates. I must have looked like something out of a nightmare, emaciated, covered in dirt and scars, clutching a rifle. But I still had my dog tags, still had my military ID, still knew my service number. The Marine guards at the gate recognized a brother in need. Within hours, I was cleaned up, examined by doctors, and debriefed by intelligence officers. "You've been missing for over 5 years, Staff Sergeant Anderson," they told me. 5 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. Emily would be 16 now. What had I missed? What had changed? The intelligence officer, John Smith, he called himself, asked a lot of questions. About my captors, about the locations, about the languages I'd heard. But one thing he said stuck with me. Someone wanted you contained, not killed. That should have been my first warning. But all I could think about was getting home to my family. The doctors wanted to keep me for observation, run more tests. I had contracted several tropical diseases during my journey. They said I was severely malnourished, dehydrated, suffering from various infections. But I was alive, and I was going home. During my recovery, I tried calling Rachel multiple times. The calls always went to voicemail. Emily, though, she answered on the first ring. "Daddy." Her voice was different, older, but still my little girl. "Is it really you?" I couldn't hold back the tears. "Yeah, princess, it's really me. I'm coming home." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "Dad, there's something you need to know about Mom." But before she could continue, a nurse came in to check my vitals. By the time I called back, Emily's phone went straight to voicemail. That should have been my second warning. The military arranged my flight back to the States. First class, all the way, a far cry from my usual military transport. As the plane took off from Addis Ababa, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. Relief, certainly. Joy at the thought of seeing my family again. But there was something else too, a nagging sense of unease. The photo in my wallet seemed heavier somehow. During the flight, I tried to picture the reunion. Rachel running into my arms like she used to when I'd returned from deployment. Emily, taller now but still my little girl, joining our embrace. The three of us together again, like no time had passed. But as the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, those happy visions began to fade. Something in Emily's voice during that phone call kept gnawing at me. Something in the way Rachel hadn't returned any of my calls. The plane touched down with a gentle bump. As I walked through the terminal, my duffel bag feeling light on my shoulder, I scanned the crowd. And there was Emily, looking so much like her mother it made my heart ache. But Rachel wasn't with her. Emily ran to me, throwing her arms around my neck like she used to when she was little. "Daddy," she cried, and for a moment, I could pretend no time had passed at all. But when she pulled back, I saw tears in her eyes that weren't just from joy. "Where's your mother?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. Emily's face fell. "She's working," she said, not meeting my eyes. As always, a sleek Blacktown car was waiting outside, complete with a uniformed driver. As we drove through the city, Emily filled me in on the changes I'd missed. Her grandfather's retirement, Rachel taking over as CEO of the company, and Robert Maxwell, the chairman of the board, becoming a regular presence in their lives. With each word, the unease in my gut grew stronger. By the time we pulled up to a mansion I didn't recognize, I knew. My world, the world I'd fought so hard to return to, had changed in ways I never could have imagined. And the real battle was just beginning. The house wasn't a home, it was a statement. All marble and glass, with soaring ceilings and pristine white carpets. Nothing like the cozy beachside house where we'd raised Emily. Nothing like the place I'd dreamed of returning to for 5 years. "Your room is upstairs," Emily said softly, leading me through the cavernous space. "A servant. Since when did we have servants?" Struggled with my duffel bag. I let him struggle. 5 years in captivity hadn't made me particularly charitable. The guest room was bigger than our first apartment, but it felt cold, impersonal, like a hotel suite rather than a part of my family's home. "Mom says you should stay here," Emily explained, her voice tight with something unsaid. I dropped my bag on the bed and turned to my daughter. "Emily," I said quietly, "what's really going on here?" She pulled out a laptop and a USB drive with hands that trembled slightly. "You need to see this, Dad," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." The videos were like punches to the gut. Rachel, my Rachel, in our bedroom with Robert Maxwell, laughing, touching, being intimate. I wanted to look away, but I forced myself to watch. Not the intimate moments. I couldn't bear those. But the conversations afterward, the plans they made. The document I found in Rachel's drawer was the final blow. A petition to have me declared legally dead. 17 years of marriage, reduced to a legal document and a death certificate. I thought I'd known pain during my captivity. I was wrong. This betrayal, hurt worse than any torture. Emily's hand slipped into mine. "I'm so sorry, Daddy," she whispered. I tried to tell her it was wrong, but she wouldn't listen. I squeezed her hand, this daughter who'd grown up too fast. "It's not your fault, Princess," I managed to say. "None of this is your fault." But there was something else in the recent videos. Something that didn't add up. Maxwell on the phone, talking about keeping me out of circulation, about payments and plans gone wrong. The pieces started falling into place. Before I could process it all, my phone rang. The caller ID read NCIS. Special Agent Lee Gibson's voice was grim. "We need to talk, Master Sergeant. Now." The NCIS office was a stark contrast to the mansion I'd just left. Functional, purposeful, familiar. Gibson laid out photos on the table between us. "Recognize these men?" he asked. I did. They'd been among my captors. They worked for a private military contractor, Gibson explained. One with ties to Robert Maxwell. The truth hit me like a grenade blast. My captivity hadn't been random. It had been orchestrated, planned, paid for. Maxwell wanted you out of the picture, Gibson confirmed. But he needed you alive. Dead Marines attract too much attention. And Rachel, I had to ask, was she part of this? Gibson shook his head. All evidence suggests she was another victim. Maxwell manipulated her, used your absence to get close. It should have made me feel better. It didn't. The next few days passed in a blur. I moved into a motel near Camp P. Endleton. Filed for divorce. Tried to make sense of my new reality. Emily visited often, bringing me up to speed on everything I'd missed. Then came the night of the company gala. I hadn't planned to go, but Emily slipped me an invitation. Mom will be there, she said. With him, I put on my dress blues. Some battles need to be fought face to face. The ballroom fell silent when I walked in. Rachel was there, in a black evening gown, her hair shorter than I remembered. Maxwell stood beside her, his hand possessive on her waist. I approached him directly. No point in subtlety. "Hello, Rachel," I said softly. She paled, stepping back. "Mike, please," she started. "Not here." "Where then?" I asked. "In our bedroom?" "Oh, wait, that's being used for other purposes now." Maxwell tried to intervene. Bad move. I grabbed his hand before it could touch my shoulder. Squeeze until I felt bones grind together. "We know everything," I said quietly. "About the contractors, the payments, all of it." His face went from red to white. Rachel looked between us, confusion turning to horror. "What is he talking about?" she asked Maxwell. "Your boyfriend here arranged my extended vacation in Africa," I explained. "Paid good money to keep me away from you." "That's ridiculous," Maxwell sputtered. "Rachel, he's clearly disturbed Dash. NCIS has the proof." I cut him off. "They're probably on their way here now." As if on cue, Gibson and his team entered the ballroom. Maxwell tried to run, didn't get far. I watched them lead him away in handcuffs. Rachel stood there, shaking. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Mike, I swear I didn't know." "Would it have mattered?" I asked. She had no answer. I left her there, surrounded by whispers and stares. 2 months later, Rachel attempted suicide. Emily found her, called the ambulance. Called me. I was at the hospital before the doctors finished pumping her stomach. Seeing her there, pale and fragile in the hospital bed, broke something inside me. All the anger, all the betrayal, it couldn't stand against the sight of her fighting for life. When she opened her eyes and saw me, she began to cry. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so, so sorry." I took her hand. "I know. Recovery took time. For both of us." We really talked for the first time in years. About the loneliness she'd felt during my absence. About Maxwell's manipulation. About the guilt that had driven her to despair. I told her about my journey. About the photo that kept me going. About the promises I'd made in the dark. Slowly, painfully, we began to heal, to rebuild, to remember why we'd fallen in love in the first place. 6 months later, we renewed our vows on the same beach where we'd first met. Emily was the maid of honor. I wore my dress blues. Rachel wore white. During the ceremony, I pulled out the divorce papers and tore them to pieces. The crowd cheered. Maxwell got life in prison for conspiracy and aiding terrorists. Rachel stepped down as CEO, choosing family over corporate power. We moved back to our beachside house, started over. A year later, our son was born. We named him James after my father. Sometimes at night, I still wake up thinking I'm in that jungle. But then I feel Rachel beside me, hear James crying in his crib, and I know I'm home, really home. And Semper Fidelis has a whole new meaning now. Not just faithful to the core, but faithful to love, to family, to the promise of second chances. Rachel and I still walk on that beach sometimes, getting ice cream from Hanson's. Emily joins us when she's home from college. James toddles between us, leaving tiny footprints in the sand. And if you look carefully at my wallet, you'll find 2 photos now. The old one, worn and creased from its journey across Africa, and a new one, taken at our second wedding. Both reminding me of what I fought for, what I'll always fight for. Because some things are worth crossing continents for, worth forgiving for, worth living for. That's what Semper Fidelis really means. Always faithful. Always.